So thank you for invitation. It is really my pleasure to talk here. Today I will talk about the art project, an artwork that I did actually 4 years ago, but now reproduce. It is here in the circulation that you can look, and a few copies are available for sale. It's like 15 euros, and it is a sort of a way of the indexing or way of the discussing the name of Lenin using certain, I would say, artistic devices. So, continuing with what already Ilya Orlov announced, that we worked on this book called based on the writings published in 1924 in journal Lev in Russian, which is the Russian formalist analysis of language of Lenin, or more precisely to say, the speech of Lenin. And the contributions include of writers such as Viktor Shklovsky, Tinyanov, Eichenbaum. But what is very interesting that what happened in 1924 is the publication of this special issue of Lev, which was edited by Mayakovsky, with his introduction called "Don't Trade with Lenin." It was censored, by the way, but this Lev journal, probably most of you are familiar with it. It was a futurist avant-garde journal published in 20s in Russia, in Soviet Union. And interesting thing is the publication of this formalist analysis of Lenin's language influenced Alexei Krushonik, who is a very famous Russian futurist poet, to wrote another book which is called 11 Devices of Lenin's Speech. So Krushonik is a very interesting figure. He is a person who invented Zaum language, or let's say a poetry written with a Zaum language. And Zaum in Russian means beyond sense. So it is very interesting line of a relation between politics and art. It was the Russian formalists actually start to analyze Lenin, and they were interested in analyzing language of art by being influenced from Zaum futurist poets, which is the poets that destroyed the every remaining trace of I would say normative understanding of language, or let's say the ideological components of the communication which are done in the usual way. So this was like how to go beyond the language. So it is the formalist who learned the logic, the laws of the language through Zaum, and applied that to Lenin's language, that influenced another Zaum poet to understand what actually they are doing. So this kind of very strange traffic between politics and art, this is something that we are publishing, as we translated both these formalist writings and as well the Krushonik's analysis of formalist writings. So I start with this painting. Probably you recognize here Lenin. It is not some Slavoj Žižek kind of joke. You know, he had this joke like two people watching abstract painting saying something like Kamenev and Krupskaya. So the guy who was watching the painting said like, but I don't see Lenin here. And the answer is that Lenin is in Finland, of course. But this is the painting made in 1980 by a conceptual art group Art and Language, and it is called Portrait of Lenin in the style of Jackson Pollock. So this is for me interesting question, because with this painting, in fact, Art and Language group started with this work. Art and Language group started to paint, and it is usually considered as a shift of their very rigorous analytical philosophical interest from that analytical philosophy interest, but based mostly on some theories of linguistic pragmatism or analytic propositions based on analytical philosophy to the painting, which is sort of, as some interpreters did, this is like a revisionist postmodern position that take place massively in 80s. But what was interesting with this painting, let's bring together quite a opposite cultural references. On one side, Jackson Pollock, abstract expressionism, and on another side, a iconic figure on Lenin. It is this questioning of the cultural references that art and language, in fact, tried throughout their work in 60s and 70s to question what is the position, actually, that's the really demanding question, what is the position of artwork in the culture, in the sphere of cultural reproduction? And of course, their solution to that was a series of a conceptual artworks that first they exhibited in Documenta 72 called indexes. So what they were doing, they were trying to index the cultural participation of their artwork. Let's say how their artwork in fact entered to the world outside of art. How actually we communicate. So it was built a very complicated system of indexing the conversations which actually happened between themselves. And this portrait of Lenin in the style of Jackson Pollock is not only about abstraction, and it's not important only because it is questioning the ideologies of the Cold War interpretation of abstract expressionism being something culturally part of the US freedom and all these things that there are books about that, probably you all are familiar with, that interpret abstract expressionism as a sort of art work that was instrumentalized by the US foreign politics and the CIA and all these stories. And then there are the other side, the socialist realist position of what is seen through the name of Lenin. So art and language, in fact, by bringing this to criticize that. But what was for them important is to depart from Lenin because it is sedimented with really a lot of contradictory references. If we talk about forms, what Bini Adamczak mentioned, yes, indeed, forms, what they are important, and those forms are where all these contradictions, cultural, historical, political, are somehow sedimented. So by introducing Lenin to this discussion regarding the culture, they want to actually continue what they do, the very crucial questions of conceptual art, the role of spectatorship, the reproduction of the subjectivity in the culture, and critique of that through the artistic means, and all these things is for them, based on the article that they publish in Art Forum, is actually the issue of offness. So they developed a very complicated analytical philosophical thesis of thinking two separate things and trying to understand the energy which comes out from that antagonistic clash, this kind of coercive situation as well. So this offness, by the way, it is interesting concept derived from analytical philosophy, is taken from a Finnish philosopher, actually also the linguist called Jaakko Hintikka. And in their text, published in Art Forum about this work, and it is called Picture of Lenin, there is no anything mentioned about Lenin as a revolutionary figure. It is an attempt to really bring Lenin to the discussion and try to understand certain very demanding questions of making the conceptual art. Anyway, so this kind of like a strange, very kind of complicated or very uneasy things to discuss about Lenin was the starting point of this project that I did, that I will now talk a bit. So this is also from another intervention of art and language when was published a collection of texts edited by Stefan Moravsky and Lee Baxendale called Marx and Engels on Literature and Art. It was the first extensive publication of such, and by the way, it was published through Sezgin's publishing house called International General, which is if you know a very famous was very famous conceptual art curator. Let's say the first person who came out with that idea to curate conceptual art in New York. And anyway, so what was objection of art and language to the editing work of Stefan Moravsky was that if you concentrate and try to look at the ideas of Marx and Engels' writings on art in the few scattered letters or books that they mention the artworks, which they do literature often, or some paintings like Karl Hübner and all these things, you are looking at the wrong place. And they were insisting that the most artistic things, or in fact, concepts that are useful for artists, are not in the pages where Marx and Engels wrote about art. They are somewhere else. So I think also it is the situation with Lenin. I mean, what Lenin wrote, uh, including what was already mentioned by Esther Lacey, the April thesis. If you read today the April thesis, we can see this eruption of the thoughts that really want to think what is happening then, what just happened that in April in St. Petersburg, in Petrograd, the workers were making the double revolution, which means the February Revolution was in their eyes already in April co-opted by Bolsheviks and other revolutionaries, especially socialist revolutionaries and Mensheviks, including left and right Mensheviks, involved in Duma and try to behave with all existing rituals of bourgeois understanding of democracy. You see, which means the very core of the idea that the state will be one day diminished is seen as an impossible kind of option. Lenin intervened to that, I would say maybe recuperation or cooptation by writing April thesis. See, so this is going against the stream. And in April thesis, if you read today, we can see so many interesting observations also that are useful for art, not only because of this sudden turns, unexpected situation and this contingency and everything, but also the analysis of temporality. You see, the revolutionary moment was completely, I would say, some kind of complete reconfiguration of understanding of time, of what is the time, not only the linearity and narrative and everything, but in a way everything is speeded up, but in that speed, in that acceleration of the things, there are some very, very, I would say, components that are not fitting to that story. If we read the history of the Russian Revolution, written by Trotsky in 1931, beginning of 1930s, which for Walter Benjamin was one of the most exciting books that he read. He was really influenced by the book, as many others. And in that book, there is a sentence, especially referring to the moment which erupted in April, saying, "In April, month of April, October has spoken to February." Look at this. I mean, already this kind of definition of that revolutionary moment defies that normal ways of how we understand the deterministic explanations, but also it sounds a bit like a mystical religious uh, 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 kind of, I would say, statement. So anyway, because of that situation, because of this revolutionary moment and all these subjectivities, we can find a lot of strange contradictory references around Lenin. So what I wanted to do with this work, to find these strange Lenins. You know, this when we say the unusual strange Lenin, there are many attempts. There is a book called Non-Geometric Lenin. I forget the author. Maybe some of you know. It is apparently a successful book. It's dealing with like a sport habits of Lenin, or drinking attitudes, or sexual life, or this kind of things. There is a lot of writings, including with Tom Stoppard's, which started with him, travesties, a play, Lenin, imagining of Lenin being together with a Dadaist in Zurich in 1916. He lived just kind of nearby. But what I want to say is that uh, we there are the elements, historical, artistic, and philosophical elements, that enable us actually to see that this bridge between Dadaism and Lenin is not something that we have to fantasize as it happened. Is in fact happened, has happened, and this is one of the reason why I try to make uh, this piece by it is based on 70 quotations taken mostly from the artist philosophers who wrote about Lenin, including Lenin himself, and including Kollontai, including Inessa Armand and Larissa Reisner and others who also were Bolsheviks and uh, involved in the revolutionary struggle. We can somehow uh, speak about Lenin differently. Okay, one very, let's say, fundamental reason for me why to do work for, why to uh, picture such Lenin, is that speaking about Lenin only from the state references, or this kind of uh, 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 memorial understanding of Lenin, is that we are then reducing all this energy, all these subjectivities which was then in the October and after and before, to the business of the governments, of the states, to the administrative logic of how institutions think about the political subjectivity. So there is, you already probably uh, smell it. There is the influence of Alain Badiou here, and the very title of this work is actually taken from the theory of the subject, a book written in 1982, where Badiou says like why we the fact remains that neither politics nor the party as their vocation, what Mallarme called the atlases, herbariums, and rituals. So this is the thing. Let's see, is there such atlases, herbariums, and rituals? I found a lot. In fact, if you read even the book which is considered as a by many scholars, especially the Anglo-Saxon revisionist historical readings of the Bolshevik Revolution, seeing the what is to be done as a blueprint of the Stalinism, of the very disciplined totalitarian understanding of the party organization, which is utterly wrong. Now there is a huge book, in fact, historically demolishing this revisionist position. It's written by Lars Tullich, Canadian Trotskyist historian, and in this book you have such a fantastic observations, including about art. It is not book about art, of course. It is about political organization. It was what when Mensheviks and Bolsheviks actually separate. Anyway, there is sentence like we have to dream, and it goes like dream, dream, dream. This kind of form of writing in Lenin was very, very much present. That's why Russian formalists like Viktor Shklovsky or the avant-garde filmmakers like Giga Vertov, Esfir Shub, Eisenstein, they were very much influenced by Lenin. Or people or the artists that were making completely abstract art, like a non-objective painting of Kazimir Malevich, let's say. Malevich himself also wrote a very long article analyzing that's very strange understanding of Lenin's theory toward the image. I also use the quotations from that text. It is translated in English. Anyway, so uh, this to oppose to that revisionist understanding of Lenin, to oppose that understanding which see the Stalin as a logical outcome of a Leninist position, is the aim of this the let's say the work, the disc, the wheel, and it is very much based on the concept of movement. You see. Uh, so it is I said 60 quotations, including 70, pardon, 69 in fact, and I divide to 5 fields. You can see. So these are like fields of tendencies, usually associated with a Leninist or mostly with a Bolshevik thought. This is materialism, of course, abstraction, barbarism, contingency, as I already mentioned, and force. These are all part of the Leninist discourse. Why barbarism? Because Lenin was with Krupskaya visiting in London exhibition, some exhibition, and it is in recollections of Krupskaya that Lenin then said, "Actually, I don't understand nothing of this. I am proud to declare myself a culturally barbaric." You see, it's I find it very interesting. It was used by few theoreticians, including Lee Althusser, that position of barbaric relation to culture, which means does not recognize the institutionalized, I would say ritualized relationship to the cultural understanding of art, cultural understanding of learning, which is, of course, in the end of the day, connected to the class position. These are why I explain barbarism. See, but then there is like in the corner there is a fields of applications. So you have signals, nation, space, noise, and time. These are complete. These are concepts completely alien to Bolshevik and Lenin's world. This is something that I thought I have explanation in the theoretical essay here. What I wrote called Lenin slash movement is what I think are the core ideas of the avant-garde and conceptual art. Anyway, so you can move barbarism to the, or let's say abstraction to the nation, and you can read here like a Marx model. There is not only one Briton, or another thing, to a mouse there is no stronger beast than the cat. Actually, this was Lenin's writings. I recommend highly for you who haven't read, thinking that, because there is this general view that why to read Lenin's writings. Lenin's writing is, to read Lenin is like you read some statesman writing, like you read Barack Obama's memoirs, something like that. But it is not, because Lenin was a philosopher. If Lenin was interested in philosophy, he wrote philosophical notebooks, which is very interesting piece of writing. He wrote a critique of the Ernst Mach and the other empirical philosophers, materialism and empiriocriticism, which was the essential intervention in philosophy that also influenced a French post-structuralist. So I would say French Marxists, including Althusser and Badiou and others. But so to a mouse there is no stronger beast than cat. Actually, I will read this. Just so it works like this. It is published together with instruction manual. So this barbarism, these fields of tendencies are listed as A, B, C, D, I, and the fields of application is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you have here abstraction and nation. It is a B5, and then in the B5 there is a quotation. Lenin's very famous text called "The Right of Nations to Self-Determination." To a mouse there is no stronger beast than the cat, it is said. To Rosa Luxemburg there is evidently no stronger beast than the Frasi. Frasi is the popular term for the Polish Socialist Party, its so-called revolutionary section, and the Krakow newspaper Naprzód shares views of that section. Rosa Luxemburg is so blinded by her fight against the nationalism of a left section that she loses sight of everything except Naprzód. So what is very interesting here is that, as you know, the fact that Rosa Luxemburg was categorically against the nationalism and seeing the nationalism as a very opposite of the communist revolution and but it's not necessarily so. I mean, the Lenin's critique of Rosa Luxemburg's position is that we cannot have a programmatic understanding of the revolutionary movement, of the revolutionary moment and the subjectivity. Of course, this is clearly a case if you look at the 60s and already what happened in 20s, but very brutally repressed, the 60s anti-colonial struggles, revolutions. So how we could then see that nationalism? You see, if we make such a rigid division between like communism or the communist position and the nationalism, as some Trotskyists are also doing dogmatically, is not being able to see what is the real situation, the political contradictions at that particular moment. So, I mean, in that sense, this understanding of Lenin's writings, the style in that very interesting, very I use this very even like innovative way is something that I want to emphasize on and on. And this another thing, and I finish now. It is that I have to mention this. It is a question of indexing. This project is not about indexing, because the very idea of the indexing that was introduced to conceptual art by Art and Language and many others, including Stefan Vilatz and all the famous conceptual artists, is a problem that indexing is the practice of the government. It is the practice of the administrative thinking. In a way, the interpretation of the conceptual art as an administrative institutional logic done by Benjamin Bachloh is true, but of course missing the point that the idea of the indexing was to oppose the bureaucratization of the artistic institutions. So this project is not about indexing, and that's why I wanted to do as a disc. It is about a movement. It is about a movement that these correlations, this kind of entry points to Marx, to Lenin, exist from many different aspects, and this is and with a round wheel, you don't have the hierarchy as you would have with a normal linear indexing, and that is also a little bit reference of what Esther mentioned, the centrifugal movement. It is what was erupted from the October Revolution and spread everywhere in the world, and people recognize these what happened then in St. Petersburg and in Soviet Union, in Africa, in Yugoslavia, and that's why the quotation includes references from C.L. James to Malevich, to Elias Canetti, and James Joyce, Yugoslavian Dadaist, and all these places from every corner of the world. So this is the general idea. Thank you.